I'm here with Giles Sutherland, CCO of Carta Worldwide. I'd like to start by hearing more about you. You studied finance in McGill University and started working for Carta in 2009. In 2014, you became VP Strategic Alliance and Development. Can you tell me a bit more about what that entails and what brought you into the finance sector?
As you mentioned, I studied commerce and finance was my major at McGill University. At the time, really drawn to that as a way to really gain a skill set that I didn't have and didn't see that I would be able to get elsewhere. And so my belief was, maybe still is, that there's some things that you can gather and pick up through your own endeavors, your own experience, but the depth of finance and those tools and the quantitative skills and things that would be important to some of the business pursuits I was looking for, really you need formal education to be able to do that. So I went the path that was not the easiest in terms of what I might enjoy the most, but that I thought would be giving a lot of value that would kind of round out what I'd be looking to do. And then repeated that mistake again when, instead of going straight into a finance field, joint venture software business between a Canadian company called RAND, which was founded by actually U of T engineering alumni, and that was a Toronto-based company. They had a joint venture with a French company called Dassault. Moved to Chicago to do a couple things. One was really understanding from a client perspective how to engage within kind of enterprise software solution business. I think the steps that really drew me into that, or what I think was really appealing, is instead of finance, and after 4 years of doing finance in undergrad, you get pretty good at looking at the numbers and a balance sheet and income statement and kind of understanding the drivers of capital markets and individual companies, but don't necessarily have a feel for how businesses really work and operate. And so working for this particular software business was almost like it wasn't management consulting, but gave me some similar experiences where you could sit across the table and really engage with, over long-term projects, a number of distinct companies, walk their factory floor, sit in the boardroom, understand what their problems are, what their challenges are, and what drives them. And then in particular, what was exciting to me is how technology will allow them to deliver on their goals and hit the bottom line. So you got a lot more context behind what actually drives the numbers. Being in Chicago, was looking for new opportunities. I learned about Carta. I learned about this startup that was building a new technology platform, finance plus tech. Seemed like an interesting fit. Most importantly, I think just the opportunity to join a really small team, have a vision that you could all come around behind and roll up your sleeves and try and build something that hasn't been done before. Titles didn't really matter, so it was just you're doing market development or strategy. You wear a lot of hats. And then VP of Strategic Alliances, which is really in development, so kind of developing the strategy, go-to-market, product activity. My title now is Chief Commercial Officer, but basically my focus from the beginning to now has been singularly basically bring revenue stream in against the technology vision that we had on day one around how this tech and this platform that we would develop could go out and make an impact in the market.
It's interesting that you mentioned that you went into finance with that idea of acquiring specific skills that you felt you couldn't get elsewhere. I very much identify with that. So that's very interesting. And yeah, you touched a little bit about starting a new business from zero, and that was something that's very important to you, that I also very much identify with. And I think a lot of people in the younger generation currently are the same way. They want to do something of their own as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you started kind of talking about Carta a little bit. Would you mind telling us a little bit more on what your services are exactly and who your clients are? So I know you operate worldwide.
So the thesis behind the business was that the banking industry and payments, so when I say payments, I mean like taking your credit card and going to the coffee shop. So those kind of payments activities and banking would be transformed by the mobile phone, the smartphone. All of that would change how we do our day-to-day banking and payments. And 2007 was the year that the iPhone debuted, and you could see apps. You could see what that ecosystem would look like. You could see how those things would really change the way that people and businesses do banking and payments. And something that was identified that most people, unless you're specifically in the banking industry, probably wouldn't be aware of, is that banks almost universally operate on very dated legacy technology and IT systems. And so that led us to invest in the business and make a pretty big bet. So we've raised $70 million to get to where we are now, to build a platform. And it's something that's pretty difficult to do. Payments and banking is heavily regulated. It took 3+ years to build the system and then get it certified with the Visa and MasterCard, and really regulated, really big barrier to building that, and a big investment that you need to make before you can ever make any revenue in return. A good portion of that was self-funded because it's a bigger, longer-term vision, longer-term business model. And then once you get into market, you need to then start with small clients before you get your bigger clients. So it's a long lead time, but one where I think we're excited in terms of where we're at now. I think that thesis has proven out that the world would need new technology. We have large customers that are coming on board into the platform, and are now scaling those and scaling and growing our business. The way I'd best describe it is, currently you go to any store, any place where you want to pull out your card and you put in your chip and PIN and it goes through some point of sale device that's sitting on a counter. That will route to your bank, and the average person would assume that their bank is the one that's authorizing that transaction, saying yes or no. Do you have enough money in your account to approve the transaction? But in reality, almost all banks outsource that to third-party platforms. So what we did is built a new platform. So we perform effectively the same function. We connect into what we call the payment rails. So these networks interact, Visa, MasterCard, kind of act as rails, connecting the merchants with the banks to facilitate the transactions. We built a platform that could operate within that existing infrastructure, but do it within a modern platform architecture, so that we would, knew on day one that that people would be interacting with their accounts and these services through a smartphone and a mobile device. We understood, some of these technology elements like, APIs, which is, web protocols, so that other services like an Uber app or smartphone app or something could actually connect in and interact with the platform and send commands. And so you're architecting a system that would have open capability to support a pretty wide range of use cases. And so that's the function we provide, and then it effectively gets deployed in maybe two broad categories. One would be there's this wave of new FinTech or new entrants, disruptors. So entities coming in that are non-traditional, introducing new products. And so PayPal would be a household name. They're a client of ours where they're expanding their reach beyond just...
So PayPal as a client of yours?
PayPal is a client. And so beyond just e-commerce transactions for online, PayPal is actually moving into the real world. So you'd be able to actually go and buy a coffee at the store with PayPal. And so they needed... they have obviously existing technology infrastructure, but they needed additional capability to extend their reach and enable their vision. And that's, I think the role that Carta plays is an enabling technology, powering other players to deliver their products and services. TransferWise is another newer FinTech, pretty active in Europe, just entering the Canadian market. They're really specializing in money transfer. So we've got a category of these kind of new innovators coming in that want to offer bank-like services but don't have any back-end banking technology, and they need a platform to enable them, and we fit in really nicely there, and that's a great sweet spot. And we see more and more coming out into the market that are basically have new concepts around banking or payments. And then we've got another category, which is the banks themselves. They're driven to innovate and come up with new concepts and use cases, but recognize that really old legacy technology that they operate on is a big inhibitor to drive innovation. And so we're working with banks to be a, let's say, secondary platform where they can basically launch new products and services on the Carta platform as a innovator toolkit to power those solutions. And in some cases, we have actual banks migrating their whole banking portfolio over to our platform.
If I try putting what you said into one sentence.
So one of the analogies we use sometimes is innovation engine. We're not visible. We're not interacting with any consumers. No one's going to get a mobile app that says Carta. No one's going to get a card that says our name on it. But like an engine or like an Intel inside, the idea is our technology will be the secret weapon or the tool that allows them, and everyone's competing. So we're competing against other technology providers. Our clients are always competing with the bank next door, or what's probably even more front of mind, they're competing with WeChat and Alibaba and PayPal and Facebook and 10 other guys that are still in a garage somewhere that they haven't even come on the scene yet. So that competitive, I think that's the way that business works. Everyone is driving and striving towards some competitive edge. And so if it's a race and we could be the engine, and it was the best engine and our clients could win the race because of what we do really, really well, then we're achieving our goal.
All right, I love that analogy.
Great.
Engine and secret weapon, those are pretty good. I wanted to cite an article you shared on LinkedIn. It said, if you look at the number of financial institutions with a market cap of over 50 billion, you might be surprised to find how Toronto stacks up. This is largely due to the city's strong and talented workforce and legacy of success in the sector. I kind of want to ask two questions in that regard. So do you think that Toronto's proven strength in the financial sector was kind of like a takeoff board for the success in FinTech? And how do you think, if we talk about the education system, what do you think students need to do to acquire the set of skills needed in the financial sector that might not be taught in school?
So in terms of the first one, I do think Toronto is nicely poised for being a real leader in technology in general, but FinTech in particular. And there are some things that I would say are holding Toronto back, but I think in terms of the positives, it is concentrated. You have 5 massive banks all here that are hiring and training and employing really skilled people. You have a really well-established, let's say, educational ecosystem, so University of Toronto, but others as well, in this Toronto to Waterloo corridor, providing a really good, let's say, talent pool, also a really diverse talent pool. And if you look at the statistics of how many people in Toronto are born elsewhere, how many people in Toronto's parents are born elsewhere, how many people in Toronto's grandparents are born elsewhere, like that is almost everyone. I mean, it's built-in diversity and exchange of ideas and expertise and backgrounds that I think and really good education sector that gives you this talent pool complemented by a really good business sector of banks and insurance companies and everything else, and also within a country that has a fairly simple regulatory environment. And by that I mean in comparison to the US, where some of the regulatory complexity of where the states all have slightly different laws and regulatory regimes makes banking a bit more complex than the US. Canada's a little simpler. I think historically there hasn't been a lot of innovation in Canada, partly because the big 5 banks and some of the others have been very entrenched, kind of have a bit of a monopoly, but there's the right ingredients to, I think, support a lot of the innovation, but there are some challenges as well in terms of not a very deep venture capital and financing ecosystem. So there's a little bit of money and there's some interesting incubators, both academic and independent, that are helping kind of foster some very early stage businesses. But there's not the full breadth and depth that you see in Silicon Valley as the big contrast. What often happens is businesses get to a certain stage and then get acquired by a U.S. company or a foreign entity, or so I think there's still a lot of work to do, I think, to really build Toronto into a bigger and better, let's say, launchpad or springboard in terms of the words you used. But I think it's got a lot of the initial building block. And to segue into where education fits into that, I think I'm seeing a lot of really exciting trends there in terms of how the universities and schools are supporting incubators and fostering startups, and even more kind of hands-on things like hackathons, or really I think promoting and allowing kids to get engaged within, let's say, innovation and kind of entrepreneurial activities. And I think the more that takes place, the better. Fundamentally, I think universities offer a really great set of tools that can provide a foundation for students to then complement and build on. So I think the more that students take the opportunity to not stop at what they learned in a lecture or in a given class or curriculum, but use that just as a starting point to then go into other activities that can bridge them into the career path that they want to choose, and round that out and get exposure into different areas that can then both, I think, put what they've learned in class and put it into practice and round it out, and also complement it with things that aren't even available in class at all and get that exposure. And I think that will help them identify the right career paths, but also make them, I think, a lot more effective once they get in there.
Thank you. So researchers from Oxford University states that bank tellers will take the first place in job loss due to AI, with 98% loss. Many more accounting jobs and finance jobs will be terminated as well. What do you think commerce students should expect to be doing in their career?
So I think the trend there is everything you just mentioned is very repetitive and can be automated. So anything that can be automated will be. And the way to find a sustainable career path and activity that would not be under threat there is to identify areas where, number one, it's not repetitive. Anything that's taking on new solution problem solving in rather than repetitive, kind of more unique and distinct areas, and in particular where that's engaging with people. So I think interpersonal skills, you read a lot in business culture now about EQ instead of IQ. I think, and managerial and kind of team activities, those are things that robots aren't going to do anytime soon. So those are things that will be hard to be automated, and that's where there'll be opportunity there forever.
Okay, and that's a nice segue to a quick little question. One of the latest RBC Disruptor Speaker Series discussed the future of education. And a question they posed was, would you hire someone without a degree? So what's your take on that? Do you think someone without a degree has something to offer to you, something to offer to Carta or similar companies?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the degree, what a degree gives you, I think, is proof that you can do a number of things. You have a skill set, you have some expertise, you prove that you can accomplish something that you set out to do and achieve objectives and goals. All those things are really valuable in business and hiring. And it makes probably the tick in the box easier when you see a resume. But if someone can prove that they can do those things, they have a skill set, they have relevant capabilities, they can achieve and accomplish set tasks and longer term projects and engagements, then there's no reason why the degree itself needs to be the total driver. And in particular, you see some extreme cases like the Theo Foundation that pays people $100,000 specifically to drop out of school and build a business. I think you see entrepreneurial activities driving a lot of value and merely making an impact. And maybe in a later stage of education, I would probably be very adamant almost to say I'll pick the guy that had a startup success or even just startup experience, really did something in an entrepreneurial environment rather than the MBA student that's learned a bunch of theory about how business works. As I would say, this personal opinion, as it gets deeper and more mature in the career, I think you really start to value real experience, and especially areas where they can demonstrate self-driven accomplishments and where they've been able to really drive things and make an impact directly.
It's a very uplifting view. And the very last question, in one sentence, what do you envision for Carta in the next 10 years?
So in the next 10 years, we are envisioning that we will scale and grow this business globally, that we would be let's say, the enabling partner that would be the engine behind these really exciting technology innovators that are going to change banking and payments forever. Our vision is that behind the scenes, we'll be the ones making all that happen.
Thank you very much, Giles, for your time talking to UTM students.
Very welcome. Thank you.